Hello, friends at Connected Inc. Super curious to know where you're dialing in from. On my end, I am in the middle of the desert right now in a place called Borrego Springs, and there's some phenomenal sculptures like this just all over the place. But that's not actually what I'm going to be presenting to you today. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the work that I do, uh, the lessons that I've learned along the way, and really just take you guys behind the scenes and showing you guys how I build these big projects together. For those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I am an artist and an activist, and I try to use art to raise awareness for different issues like ocean plastics, fast fashion, electronic waste, because I believe that art has the power to change the world. And so what we're going to be doing right now is I'm going to take you inside of my fancy little RV over here, and we'll be breaking down my approach and giving you guys a quick little presentation. Alrighty, friends, so let's get started. We are in my RV right now, and I'm really hoping that we can get this presentation done in time because it is pretty hot right now, and it's only going to get hotter. So if you see me start to sweat, don't worry, we're almost going to be done. Anyways, my name is Benjamin Von Wong. I'm an artist and activist, and I create large-scale art installations. I take photos of them. I build campaigns around them. And the last thing that I did looks something like this. It's a 3-story tall giant faucet, puking plastics all over different environments. And this is one of the locations that we brought it into. It was at a beach. We built this up in a single day, and we had dancers, 7 different dancers come in. In the back, we had a bee smoker just go in and pump and smoke out and bringing these photos to life. So for me, I see art as a phenomenal tool to start conversations. I think that you can embed so much story and symbolism in each and every one of these pieces. And I like to use art as a means of communicating these ideas. So for example, if we know that only 10% of plastics is recycled every single year, and that we know that when you put something inside of a recycling bin, the chances of it getting recycled are actually really small because most recycling facilities will only focus on the highest value plastics. For example, did you know that like black plastics, those takeout containers are completely unrecyclable? Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked, but taking this idea of only 10% of plastics being recycled, taking this faucet, building it inside a recycling facility so that 10% of it is kind of flowing onto this conveyor belt, having these dancers taking this tiny little recycling bin and trying their best to recycle as much as possible, knowing full well that it's not going to work out. Being able to take all these levels of symbolism and imbuing it into a single photo, to me, is what I truly enjoy doing. But sometimes it isn't about how big and complicated you can make something. Sometimes it's just about making it simple, making it emotional, making it visceral. So in this case, here are a couple other shots where we took the art installation both to a landfill and to a playground, where we put my nephew inside of this trash pile because, when we think about issues of sustainability, of climate change, really what we're concerned about isn't so much our generation, but the generation to come next. And then, of course, to bring these projects together, it isn't just about me hiring a bunch of people to do this. It's actually a community project. In order to bring these things together, in order to bring these things to life, we need the help of so many different people. And sometimes that means just asking your family for help. So we got my mom over here on the bottom right corner, dressed up as a construction worker in a construction vest. And I thought she was the perfect model because she's so short. And so if she's short, she'll make the installation look even bigger. And so this is kind of what I do, right? I build these entire things. And oh, right, I should probably show you that. Yes, this is a real set. This is a real location. These are real people that we come together and we try to find ways to bring these abstract concepts to life. And so each and every one of these places, we had to spend an entire day setting up, tearing down, putting up lights, getting models, getting smoke, getting kids, getting plastics, and moving this stuff around in order to bring it together. And so it's a tremendous amount of work just for a single photo. But at the end of the day, I think there's so much value to it, because it's not just about the art that you create that spreads throughout the world. It's also about the community that you're able to bring together. It's about the personal journey of learning that happens as you bring each and every one of these pieces together. So, looking at this project, I'm sure that some of you guys are like, wow, this is phenomenally complicated. And yes, it is complicated. There are a lot of pieces to juggle, from the volunteers to the materials to the location to the permits to the budgeting. Of course, these are all things that happen. But when you break things down, it's not rocket science, right? Like it's complicated, but it's not complex. And so what do I mean by that? Well, building this project as an example, we had to collect a lot of plastics. But what that meant was just reaching out to local community members, explaining to them the project, and asking if they could reach out to their community to help collect plastics. So we found a neighborhood community center called YAM. They not only lent us a place where we could store all the plastics, a place where we could just sit and tie and poke holes into these plastics and tie them together. But this was something that we were able to do over the course of a week, collect so much plastics, because there is an infinite amount of plastics. And so if you find the right community organizer to help you, you can find material. There's a little bit of innovation that goes in. In our case, we didn't want to use any new materials as much as possible. And so we found a way to convert 2-liter plastic bottles into rope. Turns out that plastic, PET especially, is very resilient. And so we're able to take a bunch of bottles, convert them into rope, and tie all these plastics together to make sure that every time we went to a new location, we weren't leaving anything behind. As far as the faucet itself went, I didn't want to buy new materials. So we looked around, we found a demolition company, asked them if we could go and visit one of their locations and scavenge some parts, which they allowed us to do. And we found ventilation duct that we ended up piecing together. And the fabrication shop ended up finding a way to mount it onto this stand, which is a manual forklift. And I found this manual forklift by talking to a friend who is a sound engineer, and he would use these manual forklifts to hang speakers inside of conferences, right? So it was through this kind of grapevine of saying, this is what I need. I need to find a way to hang this ventilation duct that we're converting into a faucet inside of a place that can be easily built up and down regularly, one step at a time, just poking away at the problem until we could solve each and every piece of the puzzle. Now, these projects, although they have so many moving parts, always start from a very simple place, right? A place of ideas. This is actually the original concept sketch that I started out from. And it came from the idea, in the plastics world, there's a phrase that we use all the time. And that is, it's important for us to turn off the plastic tap. And I just felt like this is a sentence we speak all the time. But what is the visual symbol that can represent that? And with the work that I create, I try to use as much as possible visual metaphors. So this idea of a levitating faucet, those faucet fountains, was something that I had actually seen before. But what if we hijacked the water and we converted it into plastics, and we made this so big that people couldn't ignore it? What would that look like? And so initially I wanted to create like 5 different faucets. I wanted to take over entire spaces, but it gets expensive really quickly. So we ended up just opting for one, making this one single piece as big as possible. So you take this concept, you start imagining where might it be, what would it look like, and you start taking this idea that's maybe a little bit more fleshed out to try to pitch the different partners. And then you start building this one step at a time, and then eventually it can grow into something big, some big major art piece that you hope for. And so I actually spend most of my time in life trying to conceptualize a project that is strong enough to bring partners on board, whether that's financial partners or project collaboration partners. A lot of my work is project management. But I do this because I believe in the power of art, right? And so I can create a single piece like this, and then it can spread on so many different channels. one of the things that we did prior to launching this project was reach out to all these different nonprofits that work very hard to raise awareness for plastic pollution, from WWF to the David Suzuki Foundation to the Plastic Pollution Coalition. These are all groups that have been fighting for a very long time to raise a profile of plastic pollution. So what if I could create something as an artist and connect it to the grassroots organizations that are taking action, right? But you don't just want to stop there. You want to take this art installation and you want to move it further, which is, if everyone is a content creator today, what if we could give everyone the opportunity to raise awareness regardless of what skill set that they have? And so in this case, we took this faucet, we made it publicly available. You too can use this if you are inspired, and said, hey, if you're an artist and you care about the plastic pollution problem, here are some assets. Go Photoshop this together, see what you can come up with. And some fantastic artists have come together in order to bring this to life. You can see a lot more of these remixes at Giant Plastic Tap on Instagram if you're curious. And if you guys decide to do a remix, please tag me so that I can also upload it and share it with the world, because this is what gets me excited, right? When you start seeing how you can inspire others to take action, then you start closing the loop that I feel like many artists, especially those who try to use art as a tool for activism, struggle to close, which is, does the work I do even matter? Does it make a difference? So in a nutshell, this is how I see the world. This is how I use art to make a difference. And today I really wanted to take the time to maybe walk you through a couple of my different projects and share with you the lessons I've learned, the perspectives, and hopefully something that you can take away from the conversation. But before doing that, I want to talk about really quickly why I think art is powerful. So I received this message on Instagram in the beginning of the year, this year. Someone said that a concept of mine had been copied, and I was like kind of really curious about it. I was like, oh, okay. As an artist, you get a little bit antsy when people copy you. But as an activist, you get really excited when people copy you, because the only way change happens is if everybody is inspired by what you're doing and they're able to use that as a blueprint for transformation, right? And so I went to go check this out, and I started noticing these photos that were being shared. And so that basically someone had dressed up as a mermaid. They put themselves on a beach. And for context, like, this is what the place where she shot looks like. I mean, every single day during the rainy season, there's like 250 tons of plastic trash that washes up, and a whole bunch of people come to try and clean it up. We have government, we have nonprofits, we have social enterprises, like all sorts of people are coming and fighting to clean this up. Now, none of this really matters if we don't turn off the plastic tap, but let me focus on this. So this lady decided it would be a great idea to kind of take this drone shot of her dressed up as a mermaid lying on this crazy sea of plastics. And this is something that I had done in the past. In 2016, one of my most successful campaigns, which got 37 million views on Facebook, ended up going viral. And, we had actually taken 10,000 plastic bottles, cleaned them, delabeled them, and organized them, and created this series within the comfort of our own home. Now, I think for many artists, when we think about success, when we try to create campaigns and we try to make them successful, we want to get things seen, right? You want to go viral on Board Panda or My Modern Met or This Is Colosso. And out of that, you hope that you can get some work. And I think for a while, that's the kind of success that I was pursuing. It's like, how can I be covered on all of these different spaces? Because this, to me, represented the fact that my work was getting seen. But over time, I've learned that actually the kind of headlines that we want to pursue are actually the headlines that aren't actually written about us. So about 2 months later that I had received that message, I saw this Google alert in my inbox, and I was like, oh, Vice didn't write about me. So why am I getting this notification? And it turns out that this entrepreneur, her name is Wong Ning. She started a fashion business all the way in Wuhan, China. And we all know where Wuhan is right now. And I'd never heard of this person. I'd never spoken to her before. But she actually built a fashion business. And the reason she started this business, which is creating products like bags and shirts and clothes out of recycled plastics, is partially because of the work that she saw in that mermaid series I had created. And so the most powerful art is actually the art that can generate headlines that isn't about you, right? It's the things that you can influence with the work that you create. And very often that feedback loop is invisible. However, I think the lesson or the belief that we need to hold within ourselves each and every time we create something is that art is an infinite resource. Because it doesn't matter how many people see it, doesn't matter how old the art is, it's new for anyone who's never seen it before. So if you're discovering my work for the first time, then this is something that is growing in its power, regardless of how many people see it. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, and something that we as artists should always remember as we go out in the world and we create. When I first started photography, so I have a background as a photographer. I quit my day job as a hard rock mining engineer in 2012. And at that time, I was doing photography on evenings and weekends, and I just quit, and I was trying to do work that looked something like this, right? Like it was like fantastical, surreal work. I would work with ballerinas, but sometimes like pyrotechnicians. I would travel to cool places where there were cool people and try to convince them to collaborate with me and do work together. But I had sort of this problem. Even though the work that I was creating was really beautiful, I wasn't able to get it seen by enough people. So this is a project that I did in San Francisco. I just arrived there and I'd written on Facebook like, hey, I'm looking for someone to collaborate with while I'm here. And this girl's mom reached out to me and she said, hey, my daughter makes these really awesome costumes. And we're able to pull this project in like 3 days, right? I showed up, she brought her costumes. We went to this really cool place called the Sutra Bathhouse, waited for the perfect wave to strike. So you can see kind of like a unicorn or a horse on the upper right corner over there. And the photo is beautiful. Like this is still one of like my favorite photographs. But at the time, I was still struggling with something, which is like, it doesn't matter how beautiful my work was, it wasn't spreading. And this is something that took me like a while to figure out. I didn't know how to create work that people would talk about. And if people aren't talking about what you do, then people aren't discovering it. And it was only after I created this project where I tied a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali that everything changed. And so this was, once again, just a fun, creative project that I did when I had time. My parents were trying to drag me on vacation, and they thought it would be a good idea for me to have a vacation. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm stuck on this vacation, what can I do? And I thought, well, if there's a beautiful shipwreck, then I should learn how to dive. And if I learn how to dive, then maybe I should try to take photos. And if I want to take photos, well, then I need a model. If I need a model, then I need a dress. If I need dress, I need makeup. And then one thing led to another. And boom, before I knew it, we're off doing this crazy creative project and, just for fun. And so we put this out on the internet and it just exploded. It was trending on Facebook back when Facebook still had trending. It was my most successful project that I had ever created. And I didn't know why. Because in my mind, these photos, objectively, like they follow the same rule of thirds, they have good lighting, they have good color. They're just as good as my other work. But this one was more successful than the others. And why? And it was only upon further reflection that I realized that this project, because it had a really catchy headline, before you even saw the photograph, I could ask you, hey, I just tied a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali. Are you interested in seeing what happens? It generates interest. It creates a sense of curiosity. Whereas my other projects, like the lady with a big bird costume on a rock, or a guy breathing fire, is just not nearly as compelling in words. And so as an artist, as a visual artist especially, we often think about what we want to create visually, but we don't think about how people are going to talk about it. And those words actually matter. Those words decide whether or not people are going to talk about what it is that you do. I have another example of how important like words are in the context of it spreading online. I created this series for a company called SmugMug. On the left, we have the CEO of the company. On the middle, we have his wife. On the right, we have what used to be the head of marketing. And I launched this project online as a $50 trick to epic portraiture. Of course, all the photography websites picked it up, like F-Stoppers, Petapixel, SLR Lounge, DIY Photography. And they picked it up because I was telling people that, well, this is how you create a really cool rain machine. And then you can just place some flashes on the side, to create these really dramatic portraits. So it was words that were targeted towards a photography audience. And so the people that would view my campaign were limited by photography. I decided to relaunch this campaign a couple months later with the help of my roommate at the time, who was a genius at marketing, Karen X. And she said, well, we should launch this on the 1st of January. Why the 1st? Because that's when everyone makes New Year's resolutions to go to the gym. And instead of focusing on the final result, which is what this was, we needed to focus on the transformation of ordinary people into extraordinary athlete through the means of photography. And so we launched the campaign again and called it Ordinary People, Hollywood Budgets. And this time around, it hit a completely different audience. It went totally viral on like Yahoo Health and all the different health blogs, because it was like this debate on whether or not you should hire a photographer or just go to the gym, right? Like, which one do you need? Which one gets you the better results? And so those, by just shifting the way that exact same photos were marketed, the reaction is completely different. And so I think one of the questions that we always need to ask ourselves as we create work, especially if we're trying to be an activist, is what is the headline? How are you going to use headlines and words to make sure that people understand what it is you're doing and why it is important? Within the work that I do in conservation, I've applied this principle pretty consistently, right? I created this art installation in Vietnam out of 168,000 plastic straws that we collected off the streets of Vietnam in order to create a Guinness World Record. So now this art installation is a Guinness World Record art installation made from 168,000 used straws, right? Like it's something that is very compelling. The reason we applied for a Guinness World Record wasn't because I actually cared about having a record. It's because it was a really good marketing play. Because by saying this is a Guinness World Record, everyone is more impressed by the exact same art installation. Art installation made from 168,000 plastic straw is strong, but not nearly as strong as if it had a Guinness World Record attached to it. This was another project that I did for Dell, where we wanted to use past technologies to highlight how it could power future devices. And so from a visual perspective, we tried to use the metaphors from Blade Runner 2049, using laptops as solar panels, and telling the story of how we could harness the power of recycled goods in order to produce new ones. Of course, trying to raise awareness for electronic waste. We basically took what we thought would represent a lifetime of electronic waste and converted it into an art installation. So we took 4,000 pounds of electronic waste to convert them into art. And that was, once again, the headline that we tried to use in order to raise awareness through art. And another project that we did was when we decided to tie a model underwater with sharks swimming around for shark conservation. So, the tying models underwater thing already worked, but this time around I wanted tying a model underwater part to actually mean something. And so we used this as an excuse to create conversations. And I think this side-by-side diptych ended up getting 2 million views in 24 hours on Reddit because it was just that compelling. People want to know, like, wait, is this real? Is this fake? How is it done? And we were able to drive awareness to a petition that generated over 80,000 petition signatures. And so I really think that art has a power. You have to think of not only what you're creating, why it's cool, but also how it's going to be spoken about by other people. I want to take a moment to like rest on this diagram for a second, because I think when people look at my life and they look at my career, they think, wow, I wish I could have that. And I think it's because people sort of see this balance of like what you love, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs, there's this sense that like I found that. But the truth is that ikigai, which is I think something is great to aspire to, is dynamic, right? Just because you find a combination of stuff that you're good at, that you love, what the world needs and what you can get paid for, doesn't mean that it actually stays true. Pandemic is a great example of how the world can change very suddenly. And so if the world changes, then what you can get paid for and what the world needs can suddenly change, even though nothing else has changed. And I feel that like ikigai is sort of overrated. It's sort of like saying, find your passion. If you had your passion, everything would be okay. I just don't think that's the case. I think it's something that you strive for. But at the end of the day, expertise expires. And so you need to basically be in a position where you can consistently and constantly create. I want to talk a little bit more about the notion of crisis, because I think that crisis is something that maybe we identify a lot more with, right? It's one thing to say like, oh, find your passion. But you know what? If we had our passions, then we wouldn't have this problem, right? So the question isn't find your passion. The question is more like, well, how do you get in a situation where you can continuously explore and experiment regardless of the situation that happens about you? And I think crisis is maybe something that we've all experienced in some way, shape, or form thanks to this pandemic. And so the word crisis in Chinese is actually broken up into two separate characters. On the left, you have the character that represents danger. On the right, you have the character that represents opportunity. And I think every crisis is exactly that. It's an opportunity to look for both the danger and the opportunity in anything that we do. Now, while you might look at my work from now just discovering me from the first time and go like, oh, well, Ben, he's got it all figured out. Life is beautiful. The truth is actually it's been one challenge after another trying to figure out how do I survive in this world as an artist. And I wanted to share that with you guys because I think on social media, we talk too much about our successes and we don't share enough of our failures. This is an opportunity to share a little bit more what happens behind. When I was first creating work like this, and I touched upon this, I was doing beautiful work that was fantastical. But the people that I needed to discover me weren't discovering me. I had a lot of photographers following me, but no clients. And so there was no way for me to make money creating things I had never done before. There was only a way for me to make money repeating the lessons that I had already learned, which I personally find really boring, right? So that in essence is a crisis. It's a crisis where the work that I create and the business model it generates are actually at odds from one another. But hey, you work at it long enough, you discover that headlines are really great for attracting the attention of brands and clients. And boom, I ended up in a situation where I was able to create work that was unique and brands were starting to hire me because the work that I did was unique and different. And so this was a campaign that I created for Valentine's. We tied a model underwater again and built an entire underwater set. And for Valentine's, they wanted to create a brand piece where people could live their passions fully or something. And so they were willing to sponsor a cool project. And it was fun. Like it was fun to be able to get paid to create beautiful pieces of art. But for me, I already started to feeling a little bit jaded. I was like, well, what's the point of doing brand work? You just end up creating more work to get paid more money, to attract the attention of more brands, to create more work, to attract more money, to create more brands. Like it was kind of a hamster wheel that I wasn't too interested in. And I was starting to really think about the projects I was most proud of. And it was always the projects that had a social impact piece. And so once again, I was sort of in a state of crisis. I was like, I want to make a difference with the work that I create, but I don't know how. How do I resolve this? I didn't know. How do I get paid to make the world a better place and not just get paid to create cool things? And so I went through this whole year and a half of trying to figure out, well, how do I close the gap between these two worlds? Along the way, I tried different things. So one of my first attempt at doing impact through art and photography was this travel piece that I did with my friend. His name is Elia Lacardi. We were going to go travel to Bhutan, and I was like, oh, well, I think if more people traveled in the world, we would be more peaceful. And so I thought, well, why don't we just use Elia as a model while we're traveling?
And what ended up happening was like, oh no, I created this piece, which actually looks like like a white guy colonizing or culturally appropriating the culture of a whole bunch of Buddhist monks. And so it just ended up being this piece that I knew didn't work, right? Like it wasn't impactful. So all I knew was like, I wanted to use art to make a difference, but I didn't know how to do it. And so I spent like, another year in crisis trying to figure out, well, how do I blend these different skills together? How do I tell stories in a better way? And then I sort of figured it out. I was able to like collaborate with Greenpeace to do some of this like plastic projects that I was doing. We did this photo series in Greece where we had an aerialist. I wanted to show how hard it was to like pull plastics out of the ocean as an individual, and how these cleanup efforts, very similar to turn off the plastic tap, was just not enough. And it was great because I not only received money to create art, I was with a big brand, and it felt like I had kind of figured it out. But no, there's another crisis. The crisis this time is like the crisis of Instagram, right? What is the value of a single photograph in today's world where most people just double tap and swipe? I think the value of photography is decreasing over time because there's more and more content creators, probably like yourselves, who are out there creating. And so how do you pivot away from this model? In my case, I was like, oh, I need to build art installations. What if I could build large-scale art installations and I could build them once and then they could travel the world? But then, so I actually went through this phase where I thought, photography isn't important anymore. I'm just going to not take photos. I'm just going to build these experiences. But then I realized that once you create an art installation and you want to recreate it in a different place, it's like doing the art a whole second time. You don't really gain a lot by creating this art installation a second time. It's just as much work and effort and energy, and you need to have an entire production crew in a whole different country ready to go. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, I screwed up. Not only is it unsustainable to build an art installation multiple times in many different places unless you have a very solid cash flow setup and operational logistics setup, I also didn't have any photos to really talk about the project that I created, because I just took a photo. Like, this is the only photo I have of, me jumping in position, because I was like, photography doesn't have value. But as I spoke about earlier, photography is an infinite resource. It is new to anyone who's never seen it before. And so you have to take the time to create digital copies of the work that you do, even if you operate in the physical world, right? So that's like another kind of crisis. And this crisis is like so big, it doesn't even fit on screen. But I'm there trying to figure out, how do you do like impact and combine it with art and combine it with installations? And now here we are, where I'm creating these large installations. There's a photography component. There's an engagement component. There is brands involved. I'm able to get paid for it. It's like, technically you look at this and you're like, wow, this is wonderful. You figured it out. But once again, I'm going to say, no, I haven't quite figured it out yet, because it took me a year to create this one project. And in today's world, I don't think that you can just create one project a year and stay relevant, especially when you're an industry that isn't designed for it, right? Like, it's not like I'm a documentary filmmaker and there's an entire documentary filmmaking support ecosystem and film festivals for me to be discovered. I'm doing these one-off projects that have nowhere to live. And so, as cool as they are, I need to figure out, well, how can I create more base hits? So if this is my home runs, how do I create base hits? How do I create consistent work that can keep me on the map and keep me relevant? And so I am still in a state of crisis. And I think that I will maybe always be in a state of crisis. And so if you find yourself in a state of crisis right now, I would recommend you go through this tiny exercise that I discovered myself, which is, what does your life look like over the course of like a longer period of time? This is a Google Chrome plugin called Mortality. And I decided to like graph out like my life just for fun. And so the red represents me all the way till I think I'm 18. The orange represented the time I spent in university, and I was doing photography on evenings and weekends. The yellow is when I quit my day job, and I was like, okay, I need to figure out how I can make a living as an artist. And then the green was like me saying, okay, I don't just want to make a living, I want to make a difference. And then this like green blue thing that goes all the way here is is me trying to make a difference as an artist. And then this blue over here is like, oh my gosh, freaking pandemic where nobody wants to gather anymore. And I'm creating experiences and community projects which involve gathering people to create art installations, to gather more people. What a terrible business model. Like, so if I break down like this entire presentation, it's basically from the yellow to the blue. I've just been in one crisis after another crisis after another crisis. That is just what we do as artists. And what makes us successful as artists is that we don't get scared of these moments of crises. We look at them and we tell ourselves, you know what, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to keep doing great work. And so the key is basically to keep creating. And that's what I wanted to really share with you guys today. So to kind of like end this presentation, I thought I would actually just open up some of my Photoshop files, because I know that there's this kind of mystery that you guys might want to learn about. Like, what happens behind the scenes. I know that this is an event put on by Wacom, and I am a proud user of Wacom myself. I use the Intuos 4 Pro Small, specifically small. I like being able to draw with my wrist rather than my whole arm. And that's it. That's how I was going to conclude today. So give me a second. I'm going to load up Photoshop and we'll get going. Here we go for the Photoshop part of the presentation. I'm going to put my face over here somewhere. I have two photos that I thought I would break down for you guys today. The beach one as well as the recycling one. I don't really tend to do breakdowns very often, so pardon me if this is a little disorganized. I was talking to the kind folks over at Wacom, whatever the pronunciation is, and they said, like, I was like, oh, I don't know if I really have much to say about retouching. And they're like, well, just show what you do, because we want to see how different people do different things. And so I thought, sure, why not? Let's just go in. I've done a little bit of pre-organizing to separate out my layers here so that you guys could have a sense of the kind of steps, I suppose. But essentially, this is the before. You can see it's a lot flatter, a lot less saturated. The subject, like the model here, for example, doesn't pop out quite as much. And then over here, you can see that the image is a lot cleaner and a lot more easy to see. And so if I were to kind of break down a couple key principles that I try to use, well, the eye goes to things that are brighter. So this is brighter over here, this is brighter over here, right? So the two areas that are kind of important, I guess, are the tap and the person. And then there's also a saturation piece. So you'll notice that the saturation of the faucet, the saturation of the girl are all a lot brighter when you compare it to, like, say, the blue. Maybe I shouldn't use black. Let's use red. When you look at the blue, when you look at the yellows over here, like, I desaturated everything. I also desaturated the white over here of all the plastics. And you'll see that if I toggle in and out, how much less distractions there are. The bulk of my editing, especially as I toggle back and forth, is all about removing distractions. So I spend a lot of time in cloning and healing, getting rid of tiny little details that nobody else cares about. So here we have like this 200, 230, these little like warning signs, these numbers over here. There's like a harness over here that we couldn't remove, security cameras up there. So these are all the things that, like, I spend a lot of time trying to get rid of. And that's basically it. So essentially my creative process when it comes to editing comes down to three things. The first is, can we fix colors to make sure that the eye goes to the right place? Can we fix distractions so the eye doesn't go away? And can we fix color, like contrast, to make sure that areas that are less important are darker? So for example, up here, this area over here, this area over here, down here, like all these parts are darker and less saturated. So if I go one step at a time, the first step is like kind of blending, like how do I bring out the highlights that are important in this image? I use a tool called Luminosity Masks. So this, for example, is an overexposed layer that I dropped in. So I generated a I exported the first TIFF file from Lightroom or Capture One, and then I created an overexposed version and exported that from Lightroom or Capture One. And then I use a tool called Luminosity Masks, which is this panel over here that my face is hiding, which is a tool created by a guy called Greg Benz, who I really love. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to create masks that are based on luminosity. So for example, if I want just the brightest of the bright stuff, I can create this like number 10 over here, and it will create this, the highlights. If I want a little bit larger of a range, I can hit E, which includes 9 and 10. If I want really a lot of light stuff, I can hit L. And what this ends up creating is it creates a mask that allows me to. So if I duplicate this real quick, and I delete this mask, and I want to apply this into the entire setup. Well, now you can see that it's applied only the brightest parts. It's applied a range of brightness to the entire thing, but it leaves the dark parts completely untouched. So that's just really quickly, you just search Lumenzia on YouTube, you'll find a whole bunch of tutorials. I find it to be a fantastic tool because it allows me to do other things. Like if I wanted to, for example, only put color in the highlights, I could now drag this same mask and move it over, and now only the highlights are a shade of cyan, which looks absolutely terrible. So, but you can see how this creates a layer that's just really, really cool. So if there was no layer, it would affect everything else. So you can see how you're able to do some really, really subtle changes to the entire equation. I'm going to delete these so I don't get confused. So that's the first thing that I do. I use luminosity masks to blend out the exposure until I end up in a situation that I'm fairly happy with. Usually I try to do my color adjustments later on, but obviously I was not very focused and I did it first. So yeah. And then from there, I have this whole stuff, which is where all the distractions disappear. This is really just cloning and healing, all the boring stuff that Wacom tablet is amazing for, because you can just paint out the changes. So you can see the hotspots that disappear, the lights. So there's really nothing exciting here. And then I start doing like color passes. So here's like a little radial blur onto a curve layer. I realized there's a part there that I wanted to highlight for whatever reason. Insert color balance layer. This over here is, I don't know what this is. I think I just wanted there to be, yeah, I created, so I flattened a layer. I created a layer that had less contrast, and I wanted there to be less contrast, less blacks inside of the plastics itself. So anyways, it's just a combination of masking and coloring. Again, I fixed up this little like recycling logo over here just by copy pasting a symbol from the interwebs. I don't know how good of a job I did, but let's just say it's okay. Whoa, it looks terrible right now. I promise you it didn't look this bad. I wonder if it's because I saved this file smaller to make it load quicker. And maybe the displacement mask didn't scale well. But yeah, that's it. So this is one image. That's the philosophy behind it. And over here, I'll show you how I did basically the exact same thing a second time. Because it's essentially the same thing. We started off with an image, in this case, that was particularly dark. It's fine when you shoot with like Sony, Nikon cameras. They have amazing shadow recovery. The hard thing to recover are highlights, which is over here. This time around, instead of doing a luminosity mask, I know it's called luminosity mask, but actually I just did like an exposure blending with the help of the automatic exposure tool. I just took 3 different exposures, combined them together. It created a flatter image for me to start with. I took a super bright version, and I think this one I decided to manually paint it in because so much of the faucet and the plastics in the faucet needed lightening up. So I just, did a very loose fix over there. decided that it looked a little too artificial behind the sun, so I lightened that up a little bit, and that kind of gave me the flat piece to start working from. From there, I got rid of all the distractions. So distractions in this one were the wires that were holding up the faucet, this human over here that was like in the way, this other human over here. I think she was my videographer. Just getting rid of small little details and distractions along the way. And then we move on to colors. So colors, once again, just fixing the saturation, making sure that the brightest parts, which in this case are, the column and the faucet, up here, you just kind of want to draw attention to the right things. Exactly the same thing where I just use combination of, I have two color layers here. Vibrance, saturation, a lot of masks, a gradient map for contrast, and there we go. And then once all that was done, the final piece was tilting it because the horizon just looked a little bit quirky. So I hope this gives you like a quick little dive into the post-production workflow. To me, I'm not very good at composites, so I tend to avoid them. I try to get everything right in camera. Photoshop is a place for me to fix all the mistakes that I have. So, yep, that's it for this part of.
Alrighty, friends. So that is it for my presentation. I just wanted to say a quick goodbye. Wanted to say thank you for listening in. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, if you want to participate in the Giant Plastic Tap project, if you want to be involved in any way, shape, or form, just send me a message. You can send me a DM on Instagram. You can also fill up my collaborator form on vonwong.info. I would love to hear from you. And I hope that you picked something up. I hope that there was something inspiring here. Hope that was something interesting. And I can't wait to see what you create. So with that being said, big hugs, guys. It's getting really toasty in here. So I'm going to end the stream. Oh my gosh, look at the mess up here. Shh. Change the camera angle. Change the camera angle. There you go. I'll catch you guys soon. Big hugs.